Okay, to start out with, first we're going to have to put a bead on, and of course, the beads came from Europe. The tungsten beads, the whole idea of bead heads, and they came actually out of some of the first World Fly Fishing Championships when they did ban lead. And it's kind of funny now, even though the very first championships banned lead, now when you go into the Eastern European countries like Slovakia, they haven't banned lead yet, so they're back using lead a little bit. But because of the regulations in the championship, they developed these beads. It was actually the Belgians, these beaded nymphs that we take for granted. And now they developed the tungsten sheeting, which we're going to use. But we're going to start off first by putting on the bead. And of course, we're going to try to go, if we do it right, we'll put it through the little, I always try to find out how good my day is going is how I get the bead on. Yahoo! Yep, got it actually in right. It's going to be a good day. Okay, we're going to then put it in our vise. Now, one of the important aspects of this fly is the curved hook, but it also creates kind of a little bit of a problem tying. So I'm going to actually kind of give it a little angle here, tighten it up. It's going to be a little easier to tie because I want to take the body down here to this part of the bend of the hook. Use a little heavier thread, a little wider thread too. This is a Wapsi thread, and it's called UTC, and it's a 70. And the nice thing about this thread is it's wide. It's kind of a silky thread, and it'll work well for tying down this tungsten sheeting. It's kind of fragile. First off, we're going to start off with our thread and wrap it around the bend. There's the point down there. See that little critter? You don't want to touch that too often or you're going to be wrapping your thread back. Now I actually could even reposition this to even get farther down, but that's pretty good right there. Now this is where you got to have a pretty good memory, and it helps me sell a lot of DVDs because you've got to put these materials on in the right order. Otherwise, you're going to have some problems. John Barr introduced this to me. This is part of his infamous Copper John nymph. It's called, there we go, Thin Skin.
Okay, hang on, let me...
It comes in a lot of colors. It's actually a translucent material with a paper backing here. We're going to cut it out. Now, this is going to take a little practice to know what width. Now, the first time you do this, you're probably going to make it too thin or too thick. It just takes a little bit of work. Once you, like this is a size 10, once you get the right width, then to take and keep one and to set it aside and use it as a example, so then you get all the rest of them right. I usually, if I'm going to tie a whole bunch of them, and that's another point, I always try to tie about a dozen flies because I get better as I get going. And so I lay out all the material, it just makes it easier. Now this is important right here. I'm going to lay the scissors on the hook and I'm going to trim it to a point like this. See that little point there? And that's going to make it easier. In fact, I'm actually going to go back up here and just kind of smooth it out a little bit more so it's even more rounded. Okay, now this is again finding out how good I am today. No, it is in the afternoon. I didn't tie this fly early in the morning. Now I peeled this off right here. And you can see the point. And we're going to tie this in. So we're going to grab a hold of the point. We're going to try to grab a hold of the point. It's kind of a slippery critter. There we go. Now you can see why we taper it. So when we pull this over like this, it'll kind of wrap around the tapered part of the caddis pupa body. There's an important aspect to this that I learned from John Barr. The minute I saw this material, I thought, aha, I've got a purpose different than the thorax on a mayfly nymph. Now we're going to go to the next step, and we're going to get some copper wire. The copper wire, there's all kinds of good wires out there. There's uni wire, there's ultra wire, and you can use different colors. In fact, one of my friends ties this in black, but I like the little sparkle of copper. There's something magical about it. And the Europeans, I sent my friend Vladdy, the famous Polish nymph tyer, about 10 different colors of wire, and he was going to tie me some flies. When I got the flies back, all of them were copper. And I asked him what happened to the other wire, and he just shook his head and says, there is only one color of wire, and that's copper. Okay, we're going to tie that in, and we're going to actually lay it on the bend of the hook. That's going to add a little bit more weight to it. And notice that I have the copper wire on a bobbin. I load all my wire on bobbins. It's the reason for that is because it keeps it from getting untangled in your fly tying kit, or it just keeps things a lot more neat, or a lot neater. But the big thing is when you travel, they go all over the place, but it's also easier to wrap, and you'll see what I mean in just a minute. Okay, now here it is, the infamous. If you can look in there, you can see the tungsten. It's impregnated along with some CDC here from a previous fishing and fly tying adventure. Here's where I've been getting it. It comes out of Canada. It's going to be available in the U.S. It's a product of Germany, and as you can see, non-toxic. I don't know, I hadn't planned on eating it, but it's nice to know that it is non-toxic. So it comes in a sheet. Now what we're going to do is we're going to trim it, and I've already trimmed one right here, as you can see. And you try to taper it a little bit. Now, let me explain this to you. See how it stretches like that? It stretches a little bit, but it's kind of fragile. You got to kind of watch it. Once you get it on the hook, it's quite durable. Okay, now what we're going to do is going to try to trim this down as thin as we can, and then kind of just grip it with the thread, just a little bit of wrap. See how I'm just kind of wrapping? I'm not really pulling down tight on it. Now I'm going to make a few more loose wraps. We'll go down to where the thin skin is. Now, this is where it gets a little trickier. We've got to make sure that we get it down there. We want to get it as close to the very end of the bend as possible. Now, I'm going to take it underneath. This is where it gets kind of tricky because right now you can see we're building some bulk up, and we've got to watch that. And this is why at first to kind of trim it down there works out a little bit better, kind of taper it. Now what I see that I need to do here is to bring it down just even a little bit more. There we go. Now here we go. We're going to come underneath. Boy, we got a lot of stuff hanging out here, don't we? And then we start pulling on it. And we're moving it forward. You might say, well, how does this vary from latex? Whoops. Okay, let's try again here. There we go. Now notice that it is stretching. I'm giving it a pull, and it's holding together pretty good. Now you might say, why didn't you get a big, long piece where you had an easier way of gripping it? And I've got one very important thing to tell you. This stuff is not cheap. Because it's imported from Europe, it is expensive. Let's see, right here we can get the thread, and what I'm doing is holding it with my finger, trying to keep the wire out of the way. I'm going to pull on it like this, hold it with the fingers, and then tie it down. Now if I pull down really tight on that, it would just shear that tungsten right off. This is pretty tricky. You're going to find that you're going to cut it at first, but don't worry about it. By the way, I keep that little piece I dropped. I'm going to go back and get it. I'm going to use it on a case of a mayfly. There's just all kinds of things you can use for this. Okay, now what we're going to do, now I'm going to pull the thin skin forward and then tie it off. One thing I'm going to be really excited about doing is getting rid of that bobbin there. Now we're going to come back around with the wire, and we're going to kind of space it a little at a time. I mean, you can see that you want to you don't want to have it too tight. You want to get kind of a segmented effect to the body. Now I'm going to tilt this a little bit, and you can start seeing the olive of the underbody. What we've essentially done is what the Europeans have strived for with their woven nymphs, is get a double color, dual color. The top being darker, the bottom being lighter. And in nature, that's the way the caddis are. They're a two-colored insect. Pretty nifty. Now, there's different colors of this thin skin, and you could come up with your own combinations, but I like the black, and actually some of the olive is even showing through that. Now, this is an important part of what we can do to this fly to change it. Now, at this point, I can loosen my vise, and I can bring it up like this. Now, as you get good at it, you can actually taper it and make it smaller down here. I didn't do as good a job as I could have done on it. Okay, see, I did a little bit better job down here. And one thing you notice is it's got kind of a sparkle to it. That's because we're going to put some epoxy on it to make it even more durable. Okay, back to where we were. Now, the thorax. Depending on where in the water column we want to make this, the closer to the surface, the more of a wing it's going to have. The legs are going to come out. Down on the bottom, the thorax hasn't formed, and so you're going to have a smaller thorax. It's kind of up to you what you want to do with these thoraxes. But what we're going to use is a material a friend of mine, John Romer in Arizona. He calls it Arizona Crystal Rabbit dubbing, and it's fantastic. And as you can see, it sparkles. It looks like peacock. And what we're going to do is we're going to form a little dubbing loop. Okay, here we go. We're going to take and form this dubbing loop with a tool called a dubbet. We're going to actually, it's like a little paper clip. Grab it there, tilt it around. There's a little dubbing loop. You don't need much of a dubbing loop. You can tie around it to tie it off. And then we'll take and put this in sideways. Now, you may want to hit with a little BT's wax. Well, mine didn't keep the cap on. It's dried out a little bit, but it will work. We're going to put this in kind of in sideways. Look at that. Just stick it in the dubbing loop, and then we spin that around just like that. Woo! Look at that. Then all we got to do is just wrap a couple wraps, and we have a nice fuzzy thorax. Now, our friend Gary LaFontaine, he was a big fan of Antron, and what he wanted to do with Antron was to capture the ability of air bubbles that the caddis surrounds itself by, and the sparkle from that air bubble is imitated by the Antron, and that was one of his great contributions to fly tying, was realize the Antron, which is carpet material, was a great thing for fly tying because it sparkled, thus is sparkle caddis pupa. So we're doing this by forming this dubbing loop. Now we've got to well, actually we don't really have to do anything. We can just tie it off, or we can add. I've got a little bit of partridge here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the tip out of the partridge, just like that. See, the tip's cut out? And then I can lay it right on top of the bead, form a little loop, catch it, and I can have the legs just kind of coming out the side. And just trim it from the top, right here. Notice I'm using my thumb to guide my scissors. And there you go. You could add a little more dubbing if you're worried about your thread showing through, just like that. And then guess what? We're almost done. Oops, pull that partridge. See, the partridge, you can have it come out of the top or wherever. The little partridge, just a little extra added to it. It's not absolutely essential that you have to have it. And we're going to do a whip finish. I'm going to use a Mattarelli whip finish to go behind the bead, just like that. And it's done, except for adding, to make it even more durable and sparkle more, we're going to add a little of epoxy. I've got some pre-mixed epoxy here right now.